Welcome. My name is Maureen Downey, and I write the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Get School blog and oversee the AJC Get School Facebook page. First, thank you for subscribing to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Your support makes everything we do possible, including this back-to-school conversation focused on teachers. The state of Georgia gave teachers a raise this year, but it also gave them several new laws that could make navigating the classroom a bit more challenging. We have three wonderful teachers here with us tonight to talk about the profession and the challenges. We'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions, so I encourage you to post your questions in the comments and chats. And now, to lead us off in what I think is a really important discussion, Teachers in Georgia, is my AJC colleague and state education reporter, Ty Tagami. Ty?
Hey, thanks, Maureen, and thanks to all of our viewers for being here. And a special thanks to our three educators for taking the time to be here with us. We've got Jordan Kohanim. She's a nationally recognized English teacher who taught at, I believe it was Milton High School in Fulton, but left this year to start her own business. Darrell Smith, he's with Communities in Schools. He works with at-risk students at Stone Mountain High School in DeKalb, and he's in a new documentary called The Push. It's about a student facing and overcoming some challenges. And we have Brian Westlake, a former Marine, now Gwinnett County teacher and president of the Gwinnett County chapter of the Georgia Association of Educators. I believe you're still at Berkmar High School. So I want to thank you again and just add on to what Maureen was saying. We're hopefully coming, we've endured 2 years of pandemic, and more than 2 years of pandemic, and I think everybody's looking forward to a more normal school year, but it's taken a toll. Students learn less than they should have. We're seeing in new milestone scores and other other studies. We've got hyperpartisan politics that Maureen Downey referred to that have, they've entered the classroom and they've brought polarized views about how we talk about race and gender. School shootings, meanwhile, didn't stop. Those have continued unabated. And amid all this, we have a national, a generational retirement nationally, a tight job market nationally, and that's intersected with teacher illness and burnout. And so we have a teacher shortage. And so I think we can talk about those things, but I wanted to start by asking you folks, you're the experts on the ground, what we should be thinking about as this school year starts. I guess we could start with Jordan.
Sorry. So I think probably one of the most important things that we need to consider is that our schools have been put into a very precarious position. So Maureen started us talking about that, and essentially with these new laws that have been passed, teachers are facing a type of censorship that has put them in a precarious position. Schools are going to have to then foot whatever happens. And to be perfectly frank, and now that I'm no longer one of the teachers in Fulton County, I can be perfectly frank. What has happened to our teaching profession is deprofessionalization. And the message that the law, HB 1084 that was just passed, sent to teachers was, we do not trust you. We do not trust your professional opinion in classrooms. We do not trust you to have these difficult conversations in an appropriate way. And in so doing, you have, the law is passed, the damage has already been done. And I find it very frustrating on behalf of fellow educators that policies like this are enacted with these very vague statements, which means that school systems are left with the repercussions of that. It's like a political bomb, and they're left to pick up the pieces. And it's easy when we're talking about 1084 for people to say, oh, well, it's just a law where they can't talk about race. The last book that I taught in Fulton County Schools, the last text that I taught was A Raisin in the Sun. I don't know that I would be able to teach that book this year. And that's really, really scary. And that's really very frightening, considering the vague language of this bill. Further, what happens after that particular bill is put in place and someone is found guilty? Then what? If they decide that they're going to sue the school because of free speech, as the ACLU says that they can, the schools are going to be the ones who foot the bill. And the teacher has to be able to have the money and moral or mental capacity to be able to go through that, to go through all of that. And that's very scary. So on top of burnout, on top of dangers in schools, on top of everything else, here is one more thing that the teachers of Georgia have to shoulder, and it's not fair.
Thanks. Darrell, you were nodding your head. Do you want to talk about that? Or do you want to talk about something else?
Yeah, I can kind of piggyback on what Jordan was talking about. I know we always look at it from the perspective of the teacher, but it's also going to put a strain on our students. Knowing that they won't be fully educated around around everything they need to learn about in the schools. It continue to narrow down the education pathway for these students as well. I work for a nonprofit organization, and we really focus on the wraparound services for the student to encourage them to come into the school. In hopes that they'll get the full education that they desire. With different laws being passed that are kind of censoring our teacher, it's going to be difficult. It will be difficult. And that's why I was bobbing my head, because I completely understand. Even on the north end of Fulton, it affects the kids the same on the south end of Fulton. So that's why I was nodding my head, because I can see it, and I can see how it will impact our students going forward.
Brian, you were nodding too. The same thing in Gwinnett?
Yes. I think it's important to put where we are into historical context. And I think this has kind of been like a slow moving train wreck unfolding. And it all goes back to, I think, No Child Left Behind and boiling education down to a standardized test score. And as Jordan was mentioning, the deprofessionalization and undermining the autonomy of the teacher. And instead of addressing the calls for support and the wraparound services, as Darrell mentioned, that teachers have been saying for literally decades, what we got is just armies of administrators that were micromanaging teachers. Teachers, unlike any other profession, go through education and a licensing procedure and then are constantly questioned after that. That doesn't happen to doctors, it doesn't happen to lawyers. You wouldn't see that level of scrutiny in any other profession unless somebody was accused of malpractice. And unfortunately, we've invested in standardized testing, a whole array of accountability infrastructure instead of supports for the students and instead of supports for the adults who are serving those students. So I was looking at the task force recommendations that came out of the DOE, the Teacher Burnout Task Force. And then I looked back at the survey that was given to teachers in Georgia in 2015 by the DOE. And they literally point to the same things. What the pandemic did is simply accelerate the trajectory we were already on. And what we need to do is empower the people who are actually working with the kids every day in the classroom. And that hasn't happened to the degree it needs to.
So we've written about this at the AJC, and I wonder, like, what's your experience been in terms of, all three of you, in terms of people your colleagues? Like, well, Jordan actually left the classroom, so I guess she can speak from the first person, but I'm just wondering, is it really happening? To what extent is it happening in your schools in terms of staffing shortages, inability to hire new teachers, and what's it meaning for, well, I guess some of the schools haven't opened yet, but most of them have. And I'm wondering what it's meaning for, like, classroom sizes. Are they still manageable?
I can speak, at least statistically speaking, 51% of the teacher shortage that's happening right now is from resignations. 51%. There are 44% of public schools nationwide, and this is from the National Center for Educational Statistics, was put out in March 2022. So this is old, right? The massive reduction of staff, not only from resignation, people who are retiring early, but people who have decided to walk away from the classroom, is going to affect the classrooms in a domino effect. You're going to have larger classes. They're going to be more unmanageable. It's going to be more strain on the teacher, which means more teachers are going to have to basically choose between their mental health and their career. And from someone who has left the classroom and knows a lot of people who have left the classroom, the job market right now for teachers is very good. And I'm not trying to fear monger, because I don't want people to, but it's a real issue. And it's going to affect your classroom. If it hasn't affected your kid's classroom, it will affect your kid's classroom soon, because we don't have enough teachers, and we don't have enough teachers in critical areas, special education teachers, paraprofessionals. The shortages are going to create larger class sizes. Kids' needs, who are now more than ever, they need mental health, and they need one-on-one, and they need relationships. Those things are going to be affected, and they're not going to have enough people in the system to be able to help that. And it's going to put more strain on teachers, which means more teachers are going to leave. The teachers that I've talked to have left the profession. One of the first things that they tell me is, I'm treated like a professional. That is the first revelation they have walking through a corporate door. And corporations are snatching them up because they don't complain. They work very, very hard. They don't question working outside their hours, because the amount of working outside their hours that they do in a corporate field comparatively to what they do as a teacher it's not comparable. They are treated as professionals. They are treated as adults. And to be perfectly frank, and I know no one wants to talk about this, they aren't scared. Schools are scary right now. They are scary for kids, and they are scary for teachers. And no one wants to talk about that. But it's something that needs to be addressed, because on top of everything else that we're asking teachers to shoulder, that is another thing that we are asking teachers to shoulder. On top of, pandemics and, all sorts of diseases and things, now we have an idea that teachers are going to be asked to carry guns. And I have all sorts of feelings about that, but it's not something I have to deal with anymore. So that's my 2 cents.
How many, I'm just curious, like how many hours, when you say long hours work, what does that actually mean?
Well, I don't know that you want to ask me, because I was a debate coach and a yearbook advisor and a language arts teacher for 11th grade. So Ty, I may not be the best gauge as to how many hours outside the classroom, because that's not fair.
So like 20-hour days.
Sometimes,
So Brian, you mentioned No Child Left Behind. And so we're about 21 years hence, and this is where we are. I'm wondering, is it going to be 2 decades to address this issue? And if so, like, what do you foresee happening in that time period? What needs to happen?
So to piggyback on what Jordan was saying, I just want to mention something about the number of hours. There is something put out every 2 years by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that compares the hours that teachers are actually, for example, in front of students across developed countries in the world. And we score really high in that measure. So in terms of grading, in terms of planning, in terms of collaborating with colleagues, reflecting on new research in your area, you're doing all of that on your own time, because you're asked to be in front of students literally for so many hours during the day, in which your colleague who's in another developed country is only spending half of their day doing that, and half of their day they're working with colleagues. And by the way, the schools are organized in such a way that they have way more input in what's going on, because they're treated like professionals. So that's one issue. As far as what I see unfolding, unfortunately, up till now, if we're talking nationally, if we're talking even locally in the metro area, I think that the knee-jerk response is always to provide more money, right? And that's great. Teachers have been underpaid for a long time. Money will attract people, but money alone will not keep people if the working conditions continue to be toxic. And in many working places where teachers work every day, and by the way, students go to school every day, they are toxic environments, because you have concentrated all the decision-making into one class of people. We're supposed to be teaching our young people how to be healthy, participatory citizens in a democracy. And most of our schools are run like autocracies or dictatorships, right? Even the professional adults don't have a say in the decisions that are made, how resources are distributed, what we decide to do. There's many of us at my school say, we don't need another administrator. We need more teachers to lower class size. We need more social workers. We need more school psychologists. We need more counselors. That's what we need. And by the way, that's the response. We shouldn't be hardening our schools. We should be softening our schools. We should be identifying these troubled young people and getting them the help they need upstream before it leads to violence. Most of the time, it's not violence against others, it's violence against themselves. For every person who acts out against others, there are tons of people who act against themselves and harm themselves. And we're not catching them because we're warehousing young people in these large classes so we can have bloated bureaucracies that tell teachers how to teach. And that's what has to change.
So Darrell, you, as I mentioned in the intro, you're in a documentary. I guess it's coming out soon, The Push, and it explores one at-risk student's journey from, I guess, he overcame some challenges, and it sounds like that's what we're facing statewide is challenges. So I'm wondering, like, how, like, what can we do?
The biggest piece that I wanted to go back on something that Brian said, because we have so many different tasks as teachers and educators now, we're missing that key piece that made education so great. And that's the developing of those relationships. The teachers don't have time to really deep dive into building a committed and a trusted relationship with the student anymore. It's strictly, I'm going to give you this lesson, you complete the work, you do the test, and hopefully you pass at the end, pretty much. You know, and that's the key piece that we try to come in with as community and schools, to try to, you know, form that real relationship with the student, form that real relationship with the teacher and the staff in the building, so we can get to a point where, you know, we are educating our students. But developing those relationships, that's a key piece that is being taken away from the autonomy of our teachers, because they are so stickler to teaching to the subject or teaching to the lesson.
So probably a lot of people know that Georgia, every state, got billions of dollars from the federal government, pandemic relief, to try to address some of these issues, in particular the academic setbacks. The latest round of milestone scores confirm what everybody kind of knew, which is we had some gains last year, but, you know, it was one step forward after 2 steps back. Is that money helping?
Yes, in my situation, it is. We are able to provide more assistance for families, whether it's something that's going to drive the student into the building or something that's going to hold them over, hold the family over until they find a better situation for themselves. For our nonprofit, it is helping, but it's not helping directly our teachers. It's not helping our educators. We're kind of the pacifiers or the in-between space as we're trying to figure out what the real solution could be for our families.
And that money runs out in next year and the year after. I guess 2024 is the hard stop to spend it. So in Georgia, our governor has talked about what he's done for classrooms, using some of that federal money he's passed through recently, just announced like $125 for each teacher and classroom support person to spend on supplies. There was $5,000 teacher raises. I think Brian mentioned those. And that's over several years. And he's done some changes at the edges to deal with the teacher pipeline, teacher recruitment, credentialing, that kind of thing. And as far as safety, I think every school in the last couple of years got like $30,000 to spend on, well, I guess they could harden or soften, but for school safety to spend as they see fit. And I'm wondering, is that enough? Was that a good response? Is it having an impact? Any of you?
I think I'm going to sort of circle back to what Brian said earlier. A lot of this has to do with the fact that we've gamified education. We have created this world in which the goal, and Darrell, you mentioned this too, the goal is now the end point. The goal is now the test score. And the fact that we are looking at these milestone test scores after nearly 3 years of a pandemic and going, well, we lost learning. That to me is such a perfect metaphor, pardon the English teacher in me, for what is going wrong with education in general. We lost learning from whom and at what benchmark? The entire world was shut down. The entire world was shut down, and the benchmarks to which everyone is going, well, we lost learning here and we gained learning there, are arbitrary. We've made them up. We've made them up, and we look at these benchmark tests, and the way that we compare the test doesn't actually even make sense, because when you look at 1 year's group of students versus another year's group of students, it's not the same students and it's not the same teachers. Oftentimes, it's not the same standards. And we are using those to compare, to create data. And Ty, I'm not trying to be mean, but this is what happens in educational policy. You get someone who is in office for 4 years and they go, look at the scores and look at how I made them go up, or look at the scores and look at how I made them go down. And in the meantime, these schools who are products of their community, who often have generations, like my father taught several generations, I have taught generations of students in Georgia who have several generations going through their classrooms, in the meantime are having their relationships with their communities degraded because they are in this scenario where they are trying to survive outrageous things like school shootings and pandemics and everything else. And what is our response? Well, we lost learning. We survived for 2 years. This was the first time in American history that schools stayed open during a pandemic. The last time there was a pandemic, all schools shut down. So when I hear the milestone scores were great or not so great, I don't like that as a way that we measure learning. If we gamify education, we lose relationships. If we lose relationships with students, their mental health drops. If their mental health drops, it creates a domino effect of everything that we're seeing in schools today, including school shootings.
So, oh, go ahead, Brian.
If I could follow up on that question before about the money. The money is, of course, can be helpful, but remember it's being filtered through a system that is far too top heavy in many ways, that has bloated educational bureaucracy, that has people who are mostly administrators deciding what the solution should look like. So that has to be kept in mind, and we need accountability in how that money is spent to make sure it's actually benefiting the student. The second thing is, what number would any of us choose to summarize who we are? And yet numbers, single grades are placed on schools. A school is an institution that has thousands of adults working in it, and literally, in many cases, hundreds of thousands of students going through it. But we bought into this idea that everything could be boiled down to a single number or a single grade. It doesn't make common sense. And we've got to move away from that. Before the pandemic, you tell me, going through the pandemic, which standardized test did you take that prepared you for what it was like to be a reporter in the middle of a pandemic? We need to trust educators to assess in a holistic way. We need to stop using student achievement and standardized test scores like they're interchangeable. They're not. Student achievement is something far bigger than standardized test scores. Standardized test scores is one flawed way. It has limitations that we need to constantly keep in mind of assessing student achievement, but it is not the only way. Portfolio assessment, project-based learning, there's all kinds of ways of doing it. I don't know when you get out there in the real world, what problem were you confronted with that had a neat box with A, B, C, and D and the right answer is somewhere in there? Not one. We need to prepare these students, these children, for the real world they're going to live in. And it's not by focusing on standardized tests, and it's by empowering the people who work day to day with those students, our children.
So we have an accountability focused, administrative heavy system that's in part a result of our democratic system. Some of these things aren't going to be changing, like tomorrow. I'm wondering, despite all of that, if you're seeing if there's anything that makes you hopeful.
I don't want to speak back to back, but I'll be brief. I am hopeful. In Gwinnett, I'm hopeful because we have a new superintendent. He's only been there a year. He's working with us. There's still plenty of stuff we don't agree on where we are now, but I do like some of the things I see. You know, as far as the pace of change, I think we need to go far faster. I think maybe the circumstances are going to dictate an acceleration because of I don't call it a teacher shortage, I call it an exodus. But I do see some bright spots of focusing back on the whole child, of focusing on social and emotional learning. Where I haven't seen enough focus is flattening the hierarchy. I see listening to teachers. I don't know if the teachers are actually what they're saying yet is making it into that organizational change that we need to see. Way fewer administrators. Anybody who has a teaching license should be back in the classroom right now to reduce that class size and identify those students who need the most attention emotionally and academically.
So Jordan, we had a question from a reader that piggybacks on what Brian was just saying. And that's how can educators hold the policymakers accountable for the policy, the bad policy? And yeah, that was.
So it's a good question. I definitely felt as though I was not able to stay in the classroom and be political. I wrote for the AJC a lot. My county has been supportive in the past and has not been supportive and has been supportive again. I would never ever fault any of my administrators. They always encouraged me to advocate. However, right now teachers are being vilified, and stepping out in any single way on a limb means that you are potentially putting your license at risk, especially with the new bill that was just passed, HB 1084. So the slippery language that exists right now means that being political for a teacher is difficult. I think that we have professional organizations, but I think that there also needs to be teachers advocating for understanding with the population. There are still people in Georgia who believe that we have teachers unions that can call for teacher strikes and that they can negotiate contracts. There are unions that exist in Georgia, but we are a right to work state. And that means that we are not those vilified people that people talk about in Florida, which, by the way, Florida has unions and they aren't doing so great either. So to answer your original question and piggyback into this question, I do have hope. I have hope because unfortunately, I feel as though teachers are being backed into this very question right now. How do we advocate and how do we organize and how do we hold lawmakers accountable? And unfortunately, I feel as though this particular great resignation that exists with teachers may be the only way that we actually confront that. My hope is that states like Georgia will look at what's happening in Arizona, will look at what's happening in Florida, will look at what's happening in Texas and go, we cannot allow that to come to Georgia. We cannot allow that to happen in our state. We must respect public education. And this is coming from someone who works largely with homeschoolers. Public education is vital to this state. It is vital to the foundation of this state. And I think in order for educators to make sure that it stays there, they have to get politically active by advocating to the people around them. Have conversations. When people say it's these darn teachers unions that are causing this, have actual conversations with the people around you and educate them. Do what you do best. Educate the people around you. Listen to them, be kind, be patient, and educate.
I'm wondering that all three of you have been in the classroom. I'm wondering, like, as far as parents, does what the legislature did last year reflect the majority opinion as you see it among your parents, or is that just a fringe element? Or do you even have any parents who are concerned about these issues like divisive concepts or where there's a new book banning legislation, politically driven reactions, legislative reactions? And I'm wondering, yeah, to what extent are you seeing that, or did you see that in the classroom? All three of you. I guess Jordan first.
All right, I'm gonna speak first, and then I'm gonna throw it over to Darrell because I want to hear what he has to say about this because I think this is important. So for me, I had fringe. There were fringe parents, but here's where an aspect of education and respecting educators gets lost, is that we say we need to respect teachers, but we need to respect principals too. And we need to respect superintendents, because the amount of flack that I could have received versus the amount of flack that I actually received, the three principals that I had in my career buffered so much of that. They buffered so much of that for me. And that's because they are professionals and that's what their degree is in, and they are trusted to do that. I think, and I'm trying not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, I think that there is a calculated, well-organized push right now to defund public education, to privatize education. And I think, unfortunately, teachers and educators, including principals and superintendents, are the last straw. And I think that there is a group of people who are trying to make it so difficult for them to get their jobs done that they have to step away in order to protect their mental health. So I saw a small amount of that, and I am in, a very conservative area, but the majority of people that I work with are well educated enough to understand the value of debate and deliberation and critical thinking in a classroom. And that's what they want for their kids. They want their kids to be critical thinkers, which means that they need to have these hard conversations. And I'm going to stop talking and I want to hear Darrell.
Just for me, my parents, because of the area that I worked in, that I taught in, is a low income area. Some may call it a poverty stricken area. The parents weren't engaged with the law changes and different things that might have happened throughout the school year. So most of the awareness has to come from the teachers or from the administrators in the building, because the parent just wasn't engaged in that. And Jordan, that's a critical point that you just made about the push toward privatizing education, because if the parents aren't involved, it would make it so much easier for it to happen. They're not involved with the policies or the procedures. So if there was a push to privatize education in Georgia, then I think they will have a good shot at doing it. So with me, I think just making sure we get the information to the families, to the parents, so they are aware, they know what's going on in their buildings, so they can make educated decisions, choices for their families.
Okay, Brian, you want to take a shot at that? And then I guess we have to wind down.
So at the school I teach, it's very similar to what Darrell was talking about. It's a high poverty school. A lot of our parents are just trying to take care of things at home, and they're trusting us to take care of their students. So we don't have a lot of that going on at my school. However, at school board meetings have gotten quite interesting lately. And I do think like Jordan was saying, I do think it's a minority that has issues with it, but I think it's a very well organized, even in some ways nationally organized and nationally funded, vocal minority whose end goal is to underfund, defund public education and siphon that money into the private schools and basically support a voucher system. So yes, I've seen some of that in Gwinnett, but it's mostly not where I teach. But yes, at the school board meeting, some local parents that represent some areas.
Well, I think that's all the time we have. I want to thank the three of you so much for taking the time to talk to us and to our viewers. I want to also thank our subscribers, because we couldn't do any of this. We couldn't cover the community without your support. We have I work with four other actually education reporters and Maureen Downey. And we have dozens of other reporters covering government, politics, you name it. So we couldn't do it without you. Thanks for coming tonight. Maureen, is there anything else I need to say?
I think the only thing we need to say is that let the panelists give their contact information. I also want to encourage people to send us story ideas. I want to encourage teachers to speak out when they can. Jordan was great at doing that. I hope that didn't impact your career at all, Jordan, because I think when you spoke, hundreds of teachers, thousands of teachers around the state were nodding their heads. So I appreciate that. But maybe each of you want to tell the viewers how to reach you or find you on the internet.
Okay, I'll leave my email address also in the chat, but I'm at dsmith@cisatlanta.org. I also have an Instagram page, Mr. Smith is here, and I'll put that in the chat for you all.
I am kohanimweb.com, so it's pretty easy to find. It's just my last name, kohanimweb.com, or if you just search Jordan Kohanim, it's like the second thing that pops up. I'm all over the internet. You can't avoid me.
And I just dropped my email in the chat. It's brianwestlake.gcae, Gwinnett County Association of Educators @gmail.com. And then gwinetteducators.org is our website. And I also want to thank you for actually holding this and speaking to people on the ground. We need more of this kind of thing because many, especially large districts, have created kind of PR departments that rival corporate PR departments. And you really need to be speaking to the people on the ground in order to get the full story. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thank all three of you. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we will be doing more of these. And with that, I think we've come to an end.
Thank you.